Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and inviting me, Nastenka. As she mentioned, my name is Zoe Long. I'm the research manager with the Sustainable Transportation Action Research Team, or START, here at SFU. We focus on catalyzing sustainable shifts in transportation. So today I'll talk a little bit about how we might expect transport patterns and choices to change after COVID-19 crisis ends, and how policy can be used as a tool to ensure that any changes are in sustainable directions. And I think my presentation will complement Moreno's pretty well, as I'll focus more so on the vehicle side of things rather than active transport. And as he mentioned as well, transport is the major source of greenhouse gas emissions in BC alone. It's 40% of our emissions, so it remains a key sector for decarbonization going forward. Okay, so as we all know, when COVID first hit, the impacts were sudden and extremely drastic. And including in transport, as we were told to stay home, as governments told some citizens they had to stay home, and also transport was seen as risky if we were using public form. So basically what this graph shows is that up until mid-March, transport was normal, shown by the dark blue squares, and then beginning in mid-March, the normal trips just started dropping off. So down here in Vancouver and Toronto in Canada, basically we see like almost 100% change in number of trips and travel beginning in mid-March. So we haven't been going out as much. And here in BC as well, even as of last week, travel and trips are way, way down, even though we've started to reopen our economy and aren't as so locked down. So people are still not traveling to retail, grocery stores, or transit stations or workplaces. So a key question that remains, though, is whether any of these observed shifts will become permanent, both in the amount of travel and the modes that people are using for travel. So researchers have already begun studying this. A team out of the University of Chicago recently implemented a survey asking people how risky they perceive different modes of travel are during the pandemic. So traveling using taxis and Ubers, as well as the pooled forms of these in transit, were perceived as much more risky than, say, traveling in a personal vehicle, as well as private bikes and walking. And like Moreno said, we've seen these changes and these perceived risks on the ground, as demand for bikes has just absolutely soared, with bikes being sold out. Transit ridership is way, way down, as well as demand for Ubers and Lyfts as well. So that's during the pandemic, how people are perceiving the riskiness of different modes. But what about going forward, perhaps in a world when social distancing ends? What might we expect? So I think some of these fears might still exist even when social distancing ends, and we might expect to see like a decreased use of these shared modes, so car sharing, as well as taxiing, ride hailing, and public transit as well. We might see more private car ownership and more driving and more active travel as well, when that's able to replace the right length of trips where active travel makes sense. So our team has also started studying these questions about how shifts and observations we've seen during the pandemic might look going forward. So we recently implemented a survey to Canadians, and we asked them, among many questions, to imagine a world without social distancing, and looking at the modes that they currently use, how they might expect to use them more or less frequently. So that's what this graph is showing. Of people that use these modes here on the left, what proportion intend to stop using them, to use them less often, use them the same amount, or use them more often. So as we expected, there will be a maintenance of using household vehicles, and some people expect to use them more often, as well as the more active modes. People expect to use these modes the same or even more often, and this is accompanied by less use of these shared and public modes: carpooling, car sharing, taxis, ride hailing, as well as public transit. So unfortunately, some of these observations and these expected shifts lean towards more heavily emitting transport types, except for active travel. So I'll be focusing on the private vehicle sector and what shifts towards using more private vehicles might mean. Because as restrictions ease, policy is going to be crucial in guiding whether any of these expected shifts and travel choices are going to be positive or negative, good or bad for the climate. And the economic recovery opportunity is unique because we can use policy efforts to direct any shifts in behavior towards sustainable directions. And so I'll talk about 3 policies that can be used to ensure that any expected shifts will be towards more sustainable directions. And these are 3 policies that my team focuses on and studies a lot because they're highly effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions from private vehicles. And these policies are not new, and they're actually in place in some regions. So first is a vehicle emissions and fuel efficiency standard, which requires automakers to reduce the emissions of vehicles and improve the fuel efficiency over time. And this is in place across Canada. The second policy would be the low carbon fuel standard, which requires fuel suppliers to progressively lower the carbon content of fuels. And third is the zero emissions vehicle, or ZEV mandate, which requires automakers to sell a proportion of their vehicles as electric vehicles. There's a ZEV mandate in place in BC as well as Quebec. There's a low carbon fuel standard in place in BC. So there's an opportunity for government to increase the strength of these policies and implement them in more regions. But in order for these policies to really stick and to be durable, the voters, the people that vote in government, need to support the policies as well. So in the survey that I mentioned previously, we also asked respondents how much they would support or oppose a number of these policies. And what we found was fairly high public support for vehicle emission standards, the low carbon fuel standard, and the ZEV mandate. These are the most effective policies at reducing emissions from vehicles. They receive quite high public support with fairly low levels of opposition. And just for comparison, electric vehicle subsidies also receive strong support and low opposition, which can help encourage people who are considering buying a new vehicle to purchase an electric vehicle instead. And in contrast, there's very low support for the carbon tax, which many of us know there's been a lot of controversy around the carbon tax. So what this demonstrates is there's already high support for some policies that we already have in place, and even stronger versions of these policies, which is good news for governments who might want to consider implementing these strong policies. So just wrapping up, some more direct policy recommendations. We've talked a lot about the importance of the government sending a strong signal about decarbonizing road transport and vehicles through maintaining, strengthening, and even increasing the implementation of these effective transport policies. There's also the importance of encouraging EV uptake when people are at the point of buying a new vehicle. I think Moreno did a good job about making the case for providing access to active travel options. And just because we don't yet know the magnitude of potential shifts, I just want to highlight that the government has a unique opportunity to be proactive rather than reactive now, and ensure that we really stay on track to meet our climate mitigation goals, specifically in the transport sector. Thank you so much.